My name is Catherine, and I'm 32 years old. I'm writing this at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday because I can't sleep, and I need to finally tell someone what happened. Not for sympathy, not for validation, just because it's been eating at me for so long, and I think it's time to let it go, or maybe to finally understand it. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, wearing the face of normalcy, and you don't realize you're bleeding until you look down. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio. My parents weren't rich, but they were comfortable. My dad managed a manufacturing plant, and my mom worked part-time at a dental office. My younger sister, Rachel, was the golden child, not in an obvious way, but in that subtle way families develop their own invisible hierarchies. She was prettier, more outgoing, better at school without trying. I was the responsible one, the one who showed up, the quiet witness to everything. When I was 14, my great-grandmother died. I wasn't close to her, I'd only met her a handful of times, but she left me her jewelry box. It was this beautiful mahogany thing with a mirror on top, and it contained mostly costume jewelry, but there were a few real pieces mixed in. A pearl necklace from the 1950s, a pair of sapphire earrings, a diamond ring that my great-grandfather gave to her. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was asterisk hers, and it was now mine asterisk. I kept that box on my dresser for years. Sometimes I'd just look at it, remembering her, imagining the life those pieces had witnessed. When I turned 18, my parents sat me and Rachel down in the living room. It was one of those conversations that feels formal, so you know it's important. My mom was holding a folder, and my dad had that serious expression he used for talks about responsibility and adulthood. "We've been thinking about your futures," my dad said, "and we want to help both of you get started in life." My heart did this stupid flutter thing. I'd been thinking about college, about loans, about how to afford it all. Rachel had already committed to an expensive private university that she wouldn't qualify for without help. "Rachel is going to need a lot of support for her education," my mom said, "and we've decided that the inheritance your great-grandmother left you will help cover her tuition." I remember the exact feeling, like someone had pulled out a chair I was about to sit on. Not even an immediate crash, but that suspended moment where you realize what's about to happen. "My inheritance?" I asked. It was a stupid question, I knew what inheritance meant. "You're so responsible, Catherine," my dad said. "You're going to be fine, you'll figure out college, but Rachel needs this more right now." I was 18. I didn't have the vocabulary for what I felt then. I didn't understand that what they'd just done was make a choice about which of their daughters mattered more, and that choice had a price tag. My mom added, "It's just jewelry, honey. Sentimental value is more important than monetary value, isn't it?" That's the lie I needed to believe to not completely fall apart. That's what parents tell their children when they're taking something away. Rachel got her tuition paid. She went to OSU, had the full college experience, joined a sorority, went abroad senior year. She graduated with no debt. Meanwhile, I worked my way through community college, took out loans, transferred to state school, and worked at a bookstore the entire time. Not because I was noble or independent, because I'd been told my inheritance was less important than her future. But here's the thing, I didn't fully blame my parents, not at first. They were doing what they thought was best for the kid who needed it most. That's what parents are supposed to do, right? Sacrifice, prioritize, make hard choices. I blamed myself for not being the kind of daughter who warranted that kind of support. I was 23 when I went home for Christmas and really looked at my old bedroom. My great-grandmother's jewelry box was still there on my dresser, but it was empty, completely, thoroughly empty. I stood there staring at it and I called my mom up. "Where is the jewelry?" I asked. There was a pause, that particular pause that adults do when they're deciding how much truth to tell you. "We sold it," my mom said. "About a year ago. We had some medical expenses and your dad's hours got cut at work. We needed help." "You sold my inheritance without asking me." "You were already graduated by then, Catherine. We didn't think it would matter." The thing that still gets me is that she was right, in a way. It didn't matter to 18-year-old me what happened to pieces I'd already lost, but it mattered to something deeper inside me that I didn't have the language for then. My dad got on the phone. "We paid for Rachel's education, Catherine. That was the real inheritance. An education is worth more than jewelry." "You paid for Rachel's education with the jewelry you were supposed to keep safe for me." "We did what we had to do," he said, and then he hung up. That Christmas was quiet. I was angry, but it was a cold, buried anger. The kind that doesn't manifest in fights or tears. It just sits in your chest and makes everything feel heavier. Rachel didn't know about the jewelry box. My parents never told her where the money for tuition actually came from. She thought it was savings. She was just living her life, enjoying her fancy education, completely unaware that it had been built on something that belonged to me. I moved out to Boston the following year for a job. I needed distance. I needed to stop being the responsible one in a family where responsibility was rewarded by erasure. For 8 years, I didn't go home much. I built a life in Boston. I was good at my job, digital marketing for a tech company. I made decent money. I got promoted. I had friends. I dated, though nothing ever stuck. But underneath it all, there was this quiet bitterness that I'd learned not to examine too closely. Then my mom got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I took a leave of absence and moved back in. Suddenly, I was the responsible daughter again, the one who showed up, who reorganized the household, who made appointments and kept track of medications and held my mom's hand through chemo. Rachel came home for a few weeks, helped out, was appropriately sympathetic, and then went back to her life in New York. She had her own job, her own commitments. She called regularly. She sent flowers, but she wasn't there. I was there. My mom recovered. It took 1.5 years, but she made it through. And during that time, something shifted in how my parents treated me, not in a dramatic way, but there was a softness there that hadn't existed before. My dad would say things like, "I don't know what we would have done without you." My mom looked at me differently. Like maybe she was seeing me for the first time in years. When I was finally able to go back to Boston, and I say finally, because by then I was so depleted that the city I'd loved felt like it was underwater, my parents told me they wanted to make things right. "We've been thinking about the inheritance," my dad said. We were sitting on the porch and he was drinking coffee from a mug Rachel had bought him 5 years ago. "We were wrong. We should have asked you. We should have explained better." "Okay," I said. I didn't trust this conversation yet. "We want to give you something equivalent," my mom said. "We're putting together some money for you to make it right." "How much?" I asked. I hated how mercenary that sounded, but I asked anyway. They named a figure. It was maybe half of what those pieces would have been worth today, maybe less. I took it. I didn't thank them profusely. I didn't make them feel better about what they'd done. I just took the money and then I got on a plane back to Boston. And I started planning. I want to be honest about this part. It wasn't a conscious planning. It wasn't like I sat down and made a vision board or something. It was more like my brain started working on a different level, the way your hands unconsciously open a door while you're thinking about something else. Rachel got married in year 10. Big wedding, expensive wedding, the kind that her husband's family paid for because he'd also married money. I flew back for it. I was a bridesmaid. I wore the dress they chose and I smiled in the photos and I gave a toast about my sister being the best person I knew. None of it was a lie exactly. Rachel was lovely. She was always lovely. That was the hardest part about this whole thing. She wasn't a villain. She was just a girl who'd received an advantage she didn't even know was unearned. It was at the rehearsal dinner that I learned something that changed everything. My mom, after a few drinks, was talking about the house. My parents' house. The one I grew up in. The one my parents had been living in for 30 years, built in 1993, mortgaged for another 15 years before they paid it off. "We're thinking about downsizing," my mom said. "Getting something smaller. We've put so much into this place." And then Rachel's new in-laws started talking about their property portfolio, their vacation homes, their investments. And Rachel was bragging about how she and her husband were looking at a house in the Hamptons. I watched my parents' faces during all of this. My dad looked proud. My mom looked wistful. They were watching their youngest daughter live the kind of life they'd always dreamed of. Later that night in the hotel room, I called my mom. "About the house," I said. "What are you planning?" "We'd put it on the market probably next year. We'd downsize to a condo or something." "Why?" "Because I want to buy it," I said. There was a long silence. "Catherine, you live in Boston. You can't buy a house in Ohio." "I don't know yet," I said, "but I will." And then I hung up. That's when the real planning started. It took me 4 years. I moved jobs, took a role with a Boston-based company that would let me work remotely. I rented out my apartment and moved into a tiny studio. I cut my expenses to the bone. The money my parents had given me as compensation, I invested it. I picked up freelance work. I did things I wasn't proud of. I asked an ex-boyfriend for a loan, paid him back with interest. I sold a car I'd been keeping because it was from a good time in my life. I scraped and I saved and I calculated and I planned. No one knew, not a single person in my life. When I was ready, I called my parents and told them I wanted to buy the house. I didn't tell them how I'd saved the money. I didn't tell them about the business plan I'd been developing. I was going to turn the bottom floor into a short-term rental Airbnb situation, which would generate income and cover the mortgage and property taxes. My parents seemed confused at first, but then they seemed relieved, grateful even, because now they didn't have to sell to strangers. The house was staying in the family. Their house, the place where I'd grown up, where I'd been told my inheritance didn't matter, was going to be mine. We closed on a Tuesday in March. I stood in that empty house. My parents had already moved to a condo in a retirement community, and I felt something shift, not healing. I wouldn't call it healing, but something. The house was underwater for the first 3 years. The market crashed and my equity disappeared. The rental income barely covered the mortgage. I was bleeding money every month, working full-time, managing the property remotely and barely sleeping. But I owned it. I had a mortgage in my name. I had roots that couldn't be cut out from under me. And then in year 3, things started changing. The market recovered, the neighborhood gentrified. I started getting interested inquiries from real estate developers. But I didn't sell, I held onto it. Here's where the twist comes in, the part that made me understand that this whole thing had never been about revenge, not really. 3 years after I bought the house, my dad had a stroke. Not a massive one, but significant enough that he couldn't work anymore. My parents' retirement savings, which they'd thought was secure, started getting drained by medical bills. My mom got another cancer diagnosis, different type, more serious. They'd structured their life around the assumption that they'd have another 15 years of good health and income. They were drowning. And Rachel couldn't help, not really. Her husband had been hit hard in a lawsuit, something to do with his family business. I won't go into details, but it was public record if you looked. They'd had to liquidate a lot of their assets. The Hamptons house was gone. They still had money, but not the infinite kind they'd expected. One Sunday, my dad called me. He sounded older than he had in years, even though it had only been a few months since I'd seen him. "Catherine," he said, "your mom and I need to move somewhere smaller. The condo is too expensive now. Our medical bills, we're going to have to sell." I already knew this. I'd been following their situation, reading between the lines of my mom's careful explanations in our monthly calls. "There's something I want to run by you," I said. "I've been thinking." I outlined a plan. They would move into the first floor of the house I owned. The main bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, completely separate from where I lived upstairs. They'd pay me a small amount of rent, enough to cover their share of utilities and property tax. It would be cheaper than anything they could rent in Columbus, and they'd be in a house that meant something to them. My parents cried when I made this offer, not delicate tears, real gulping shock tears. "Why would you do this?" my mom asked, "after what we did?" "Because you're my parents," I said, "and because I can." There it is. That's the part that took me 8 years and $300,000 in debt, and the most disciplined financial plan of my life to understand. The revenge wasn't about taking anything back. It was about making sure that I would be the one in the position of power, that I would be the one choosing generosity or withholding it, that I would never again be the person to whom things happened. My parents moved in the following month. The house transformed. I renovated the upstairs into a beautiful, separate living space. My parents had their own entrance, their own life, their own privacy, but they were there, and more than that, I was the one taking care of them now. Rachel called me after she found out. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes. "That was really generous," she said. "It was the right thing to do," I said. "Dad mentioned you're not charging them much rent." "I'm not charging them anything beyond what I actually need for expenses." There was a pause. I could feel her thinking, calculating, realizing what this meant, that I'd built something she couldn't touch, that I'd secured a future and my parents' stability in one decision, that my quiet, responsible nature, the thing that had been treated as weakness, had actually been power the whole time. "That's really generous," she said again. No, I said, it's not generous, it's love, you wouldn't know the difference. I hung up. I haven't spoken to Rachel since. My parents are living in my house now. It's been 3 years. My dad's health has stabilized, though he'll never fully recover. My mom finished another round of chemo. She's in remission again. They're not worried about money the way they were before. They're not worried about losing their home. The house that was supposed to be the answer to all my problems, the house I spent years acquiring to prove something, to fix something, turned out to be exactly that, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't about winning. It was about becoming someone I could respect. My dad doesn't bring up the jewelry box anymore. My mom does sometimes, usually when she's had a glass of wine, and she says something like, "I'm still so sorry about that." And I tell her it doesn't matter, and I mean it. The actual jewelry was never the point. The point was that I learned I could survive losing things. I learned I could work towards something without becoming bitter. I learned that the best version of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so solid and real that nothing and no one can diminish it. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd just asked my parents for help buying the house. If I'd been honest about needing it, they probably would have helped if they could, but I didn't ask. I decided to prove something instead. For 8 years, that's what I was doing, proving something. Proving what exactly, I'm still not entirely sure. That I was worth something, maybe. That I could survive without them. That I was strong enough to be alone. The ironic thing is that being strong enough to be alone is what made it possible for me to build something that includes them again. Not as the people who failed me, but as people who are struggling and who I can help. That's not forgiveness exactly, but it's something better. It's perspective. I still have that empty jewelry box my great-grandmother left me. It's upstairs in my bedroom and it's still empty. Sometimes I think about filling it again, going to an antique store and finding pieces I like, building my own collection. But I haven't yet. Part of me likes that it's empty. It's honest. It's proof that loss happened and that I moved on anyway. Rachel is fine, by the way. Her marriage survived the financial upheaval. They're rebuilding. She's having a baby later this year. She called to tell me, probably because our mom asked her to. I congratulated her. I meant it. I don't wish her anything bad. But I also don't need anything from her anymore. Not her approval, not her friendship, not acknowledgement of the unfairness that happened. Sometimes that feels like the real victory. I'm 32 now. I own a house. I have a job I like. I'm in therapy, dealing with the fallout of spending 8 years in a kind of cold rage without even acknowledging it. My therapist says I'm more emotionally available now than I've been in years, which I find funny because I feel like I'm just beginning to understand what I've done and why I did it. Last week, my mom was gardening in the backyard, and she asked me if I was happy. I don't know if happy is the word, I said. What would be the word? She asked. I thought about it. The house, the fact that I own it. The weird position I'm in with my parents, not parent-child in the traditional way, but something more equal and more complicated. The knowledge that I can survive anything. The understanding that forgiveness doesn't look like absolution, but like moving forward. Honest, I said finally. I'd say I'm honest. She smiled, and that was that. So that's the story. No dramatic confrontation. No satisfying moment where Rachel realizes what she's done. No moment where my parents grovel for forgiveness. Just years of work, a shift in power, and the slow, quiet understanding that the best revenge is building a life so solid that nothing can shake it. I don't know if this is the ending I expected when I was 18 and my inheritance was being taken away, but I think it might be the ending I needed.